I stood at the doorway with my suitcase in hand. Inside the house was a mess. Margaret, my mother-in-law, was collapsed on the couch, sobbing so hard she could barely breathe. Across the room, my brother-in-law Dennis was seething, his face flushed red as he pointed a trembling finger at my husband. "Harold, are you really just gonna stand there and say nothing? Mom and Dad are pushing 80. You let the caregiver go and now what? You expect them to cook for themselves? And your wife, she's just waltzing out with her luggage without saying a word." Harold stood in the middle of the living room, face stiff and gray like a slab of concrete. He didn't say a word. I let out a low, bitter laugh. Finally I spoke. "Whoever fired the caregiver should be the one stepping up. I'm just the outsider around here, remember? I've bent over backward for this family for over 20 years. I think I've earned my rest." Dennis snapped his head toward me, his eyes sharp as blades. "You've been living in our house, eating our food all these years, and now you think you can just walk out? What kind of fairness is that supposed to be?" I tightened my grip on the suitcase handle until my knuckles turned white. The audacity. After all these years, what exactly do I owe them? If it weren't for Harold, I would have left a long time ago. Margaret clutched her chest, her wails rising in pitch. "God help me, how did I end up like this? After all these years, I'm just a burden now." The air was heavy, like the room itself was holding its breath. I took one long look at the house I'd lived in for nearly 30 years. The mug on the coffee table still steamed. The ivy in the corner drooped, thirsty and forgotten, mirroring the way I'd been slowly drained in this place. But not today. Today I wasn't backing down. "Margaret, enough with the tears," I said evenly, my voice low but firm. "Dennis will take care of you now. As for me, I'm done. I'm finally going to live my own life." I didn't look back. I rolled my suitcase past the foyer, past their voices. Dennis's fury, Margaret's sobs, and Harold's silence. That damn silence, like a dull rusted blade digging slow and deep. But I kept walking. "My name is Linda Carter. I'm 66 years old. Before I retired, I worked at the state comptroller's office for over 2 decades, managing budgets down to the cent. My husband, Harold, is 3 years older than me and already retired. Between our pensions, we should have been able to enjoy a peaceful, modest retirement. When I married Harold, I thought I was making the smart choice. He was steady, dependable, supportive. He always said I could be whoever I wanted to be. But there was one problem: his family. Harold is the eldest. His younger brother Dennis is a full 10 years younger. Their parents, especially his mother Margaret, had it rough when they were younger. She's the textbook definition of a mom who spoils the baby of the family rotten. Dennis was her golden boy, her precious miracle. When Harold and I first got married, Margaret never warmed to me. Not because I did anything wrong. No, she just didn't see me as worth noticing. In her world, there were only 2 people who mattered: her sons. A year into the marriage, I gave birth to our daughter, Melissa. The moment Margaret saw her, the smile on her face dimmed. At the hospital, she glanced at me and said, "Next time try for a boy." I was stunned. I turned to Harold, hoping for something. He gave me a sheepish smile and said nothing. Margaret refused to help with childcare. Claimed she was too old, too frail to care for a baby. But when Dennis got married and his wife Janine gave birth to a boy, Margaret practically threw a party. She packed her bags and moved into their home, stayed for years. While she played Grandma of the Year to her grandson, I was working full-time, coming home to take care of Melissa alone, barely taking time to breathe. My back ached constantly, but Margaret never once asked if I was okay. And Harold? He was a devoted son, but a spineless husband. Whenever his mother spoke, he shut up. Her word was law. As I fought back. In our younger years, I argued with Harold, even confronted Margaret. But every time I lost, Margaret would start crying and Harold would fold like a lawn chair. "She's my mother, Linda. Don't stoop to her level. Don't stoop to her level." That phrase choked me for decades. Eventually I stopped fighting. I learned to stay quiet. I became invisible in my own home. But the years wore on and things started to shift. Margaret's back began to bother her. Frank, Harold's dad, could barely get around. Then Dennis dropped a little bomb. "Linda," he said, all faux concern, "my parents are getting old. They can't live alone anymore. Janine and I both work full-time. You guys are retired, maybe it's time you help out, pitch in as family." I was shaking with rage. Harold just frowned and said, "Maybe we hire someone. Or a senior living facility." Dennis didn't argue. Of course not, he had no plans to lift a finger himself. So we hired a full-time live-in caregiver. And who footed the bill? We did. Naturally. Even with help, I was still the one managing prescriptions, hospital visits, cooking, cleaning. The grunt work always landed on me. Then came the breaking point last month. Both Margaret and Frank got sick, hospitalized for 2 weeks. The bills were sky high. Dennis started dropping hints that we should cover more, saying things like, "You two get decent pensions and don't have a mortgage. It's only fair." And once the old folks were discharged, Dennis didn't even consult us. He just let the caregiver go, claiming she wasn't doing a great job. Family takes better care anyway. I knew what that meant. He didn't give a damn about care quality. He just didn't want to spend the money. And he wanted to shove the burden right into my lap. Well, I've held my tongue for 30 years. Not anymore. He fired the caregiver and dumped all the dirty, exhausting work on me. Harold said nothing. Not one word. Just stood there and let it happen. That's when it hit me. In this house, I was never the lady of the home. I was just an unpaid worker. No title, no thanks, no dignity. I stood outside with my suitcase in hand, the night wind crawling down the back of my neck. The street lamp above me flickered twice before casting its dim glow, illuminating the dust on my shoes, the kind you pick up walking out of an old house for the last time. And yet for the first time in years I felt light. I was so damn tired. Ever since I got married, I'd been spinning like a cog in someone else's machine. Always moving, always holding it together. And for what? Not a single word of gratitude. In the end, I was nothing more than a burden in their eyes. Well, fine. If no one's grateful, then I have no reason to keep sacrificing. I pulled out my phone and called Melissa. There was a brief silence on the other end before she asked, "Mom, are you really doing this?" I smiled. Yeah. For once in my life, I finally know what I want. After I left, I checked into a roadside motel and stayed there 2 nights. Turned my phone on silent. Nobody called. On the 3rd morning, Melissa finally rang. "Mom, where are you?" He sounded tired but steady. "I'm at a motel. Don't worry. You should go to Nora's. I just talked to her. She said you can stay as long as you need." I paused. Nora's face came to mind, always smiling, always calm. Truth was, I didn't know where else I would go. The door to Nora's place opened before I could press the bell a second time. She stood there in soft house pants, her hair twisted up in a messy bun, half-dried face mask cracking slightly as she blinked at me. Then without a word she stepped forward and pulled me into a hug, tight, solid, warm. "You got here just in time," she said, her voice easy and unbothered. "I've got chamomile tea brewing. Come warm up." I didn't hesitate. I stepped inside and the door clicked shut behind me with a soft, final-sounding thud. Just like that, the suffocating house I'd left was on the other side of the world. I set my suitcase by the couch and shrugged off my coat. Nora took it, hung it up, and handed me a mug of tea like it was the most natural thing in the world. "Melissa gave me a heads up," she said. "Told me you might be looking for a place to land. Linda, you finally did what you should have done years ago." I gave a half smile, didn't say anything. Just stared down at the petals floating in my cup. "You know," she continued, "after you left, Dennis threw a whole performance for the neighbors. Told them you abandoned your responsibilities. Said you left his poor parents high and dry. Margaret was crying and Dennis was hamming it up. Whole neighborhood got a front row seat." I looked up slowly, the blood draining from my face. "I took care of them for 30 years. I never once complained." He said that. "They always thought you owed it to them. The minute you stopped saying yes, you became the villain." He sat beside me, serious now. "And you still haven't set up your own pension account, have you? You need to do that. No. Don't give Harold any more access to your money." I nodded. I didn't want to dwell on the past anymore. "I'm thinking of volunteering somewhere," I said. "Maybe at a local counseling center. And looking into independent living communities. I'm not going back there. I mean it." "You shouldn't," Nora said softly. "You deserve your own house. Your own life. Your own name." That last part hit me so hard I nearly spilled my tea. Your own name. My eyes stung suddenly and unexpectedly. The next morning, Nora walked into the room with a breakfast tray. Her expression told me something was wrong. "Did you see it yet?" she asked, placing scrambled eggs in front of me. I shook my head. She slid her tablet across the table. The homepage had already loaded. The headline punched me in the chest. Heartless wife walks out on elderly in-laws, neighbors left outraged by her callousness. I skimmed the post, my stomach turning. It was anonymous, but the tone was venomous, and the photos were unmistakable. There was Margaret, pale and frail, on the couch. Frank's walker leaned in the corner. Dennis stood behind them, his face twisted in manufactured grief, like some kind of grieving saint caught mid-tragedy. The post read like something out of a soap opera. She walked out with her suitcase without a shred of remorse, it said, leaving two frail elders to fend for themselves. It even quoted anonymous neighbors, shaking their heads at that woman. I stared at the photo for several long seconds before I realized. The angle was from across the street, from directly in front of our old front door. Nora, they've already started turning the neighbors against me, haven't they? She nodded. Jackie called me this morning. Said Dennis was out in your front yard last night, crying, yelling about how heartless you were. Claimed you took the retirement money and ran. They're not afraid of lying, she said, sitting down beside me, her voice resolute. They're only afraid of you telling the truth. It's time you fought back, Linda. I was quiet for a moment, then turned to her. I still have some old videos on my phone. Could you help me cut them together? That afternoon, we transferred over 3 hours of footage to Nora's laptop. Clips of me boiling soft food in the middle of the night. Of me crouched by Margaret's feet, rubbing ointment into her swollen ankles. Of me sweating through my clothes while switching out Frank's oxygen tank. Shots of me dozing off in an emergency room chair after hours of waiting for test results. I picked 6 segments and edited them into a 2-minute video. At the end, we added a single line of text. Just because you didn't see it doesn't mean it didn't happen. I posted the video in the neighborhood community group. Within hours, my phone blew up. Linda, we had no idea you were doing all that. You carried Frank? By yourself. They really had the nerve to say you abandoned them? I sat back on the couch, reading the messages, unsure whether I wanted to cry or not. The tears hovered but didn't fall. Nora didn't say anything. She just draped a blanket over my knees and nudged the cup of tea a little closer to me. I let out a long breath and set my phone down, screen face down on the coffee table. I knew this wasn't over. While Nora was out getting groceries, I sat in the sunlit corner of her kitchen, flipping through an old folder I'd taken back from Harold. He used to keep it shoved under the TV stand, probably assuming I'd never bother to look at it. And honestly, I wouldn't have, if it weren't for the bank statement that landed in my inbox the night before. The account balance was $8,700 lower than it should have been. It was our joint account. We opened it together. And I had always believed, naively I now realized, that it was our shared nest egg for retirement. When I called Harold, he fumbled through an explanation. Said it went toward hiring another caregiver. But the caregiver had been gone for 2 weeks. The next day I went to the bank. The teller hesitated as she pulled up the records. Mrs. Carter, over the past 3 months, there've been 5 large withdrawals. All made in person. All signed by the account holder. She printed the transaction history and handed it to me. I laid the sheets out across the table, tracing the rows line by line. Each withdrawal was signed by Harold. That night I asked Nora to take a picture of me. I sat by the window in her study wearing my reading glasses, a stack of paperwork in my hands. The background showed rows of bookshelves and a desk lamp. It was deliberate. I posted the photo in our family group chat. Harold, remember our agreement? I never withdrew from our joint funds. But you also don't have the right to access my share without my consent. The group went silent. For 2 full hours. Then a single reply popped up. Linda, are you really trying to turn this into a legal mess? I didn't answer. The next morning Harold called. The first words out of his mouth weren't, I'm sorry. They were, if you sue me we'll both lose in the end. I stood on Nora's front porch, the morning wind tugging gently at my cardigan. I spoke calmly, each word clear and sharp. Then tell the judge you used the retirement savings of the woman who stood beside you for 30 years, and called it family need. He was quiet for a long time. Then, Linda, when are you coming home? Harold, I said, face it. I already left. You're just the one who hasn't caught up. I heard the faint sound of him sighing right before I hung up. That afternoon I met with a legal advisor from the Senior Advocacy Center. I brought the bank statements and copies of my old pay stubs from the state comptroller's office. As I headed for the door, Nora asked, "Are you really ready for this?" I smiled faintly but didn't answer. This wasn't about proving who was wrong. It was about taking back control of my life. The next few days were like flipping between two temperatures. In the daylight hours, I stayed in Nora's warm kitchen. The window looked out over her lemon tree and the quiet backyard. She hummed while she cooked, talked to her dog like he was human, told stories that made me laugh. It was peaceful. But come nightfall, the cold came in the form of texts and voicemails. "Dad's blood pressure is spiking again," Dennis wrote, attaching a picture of a digital monitor. I didn't reply. Then Harold called again. Still clinging to the same broken script. "Can't you see how hard this is for all of us right now?" I answered evenly. "I'm not responsible for your lies, Harold. Or for the mess you made when you fired the caregiver." He went quiet. The next morning, I officially filed for a freeze on our joint marital assets. Nora came with me to the attorney's office. After reviewing the documents I'd brought, the lawyer looked up and asked, "How would you like to proceed with division?" "I'm not being greedy," I said. "All I want is for my share to be protected from further misuse. The house and the trust, we bought them together. I'm willing to negotiate, but only under legal protection." She nodded and typed a phrase onto her screen: "Marital property boundary negotiation." Meanwhile, Harold launched his own little campaign. He went to Melissa hoping she'd play emotional mediator. "Your mom's being too extreme," he told her. "Family isn't supposed to be about lawyers and lawsuits. It's about feelings." Melissa later told me what she said to him. "Dad, feelings don't mean much after you've stolen her money." I smiled. Not out of spite, but because someone finally said it. Finally saw it. Dennis, of course, wasn't going to sit quietly either. He tried to go around me, contacting the bank to access one of our old joint accounts, the one we'd opened years ago for Margaret and Frank's medical emergencies. But I'd already frozen every account with both our names on it. Dennis sent me a long, angry text. "You're tearing this family apart." I didn't reply. Because I knew what that message really meant. He had nowhere left to turn. Soon after, Margaret was hospitalized again. A sudden infection. This time Dennis didn't bother texting. He called Melissa directly, panic crackling in his voice. "The hospital wants to keep her a few days for observation. Do you think your mom could come help? Just for a few days." Melissa could barely finish relaying the message before she started laughing. "They're actually panicking now." Of course I didn't go. Janine had to hire a temporary care agency at the last minute. But from night one it was chaos. Margaret complained the aide didn't know how to slice her carrots thin enough. Said she was too slow, too cold, not friendly. Frank grumbled all night about the electric bed being stiff and the bath water too lukewarm. By the next day the aide had called in sick. The agency sent someone new. Janine, already at her limit, exploded at the nurse's station. "This is private care, not daycare. She's not a damn queen." For the next few days, Dennis and Janine rotated shifts at the hospital like exhausted soldiers on the front line. Dennis had to clean up Margaret's incontinence one night. He gagged 3 times and almost dropped the bedpan. Janine, after Margaret refused hospital food and demanded the soft chicken broth from home, stayed up until 3 a.m. cooking 2 pots, only for Margaret to sip once and mutter, "Too salty." On the 5th night Janine cracked. She stormed into the hallway and made a phone call loud enough for the entire nurse's station to hear. "I don't care what it takes, get Linda back here. I can't do this one more damn day." Unfortunately for her, an old neighbor happened to be in the waiting room. Later that night she casually dropped a message into the community forum. "Now I understand just how much Linda used to carry." And that one sentence, simple, unassuming, broke the seal. More and more people began chiming in, sharing stories. How they'd seen me standing in the pharmacy line with Margaret's prescriptions. How I pushed Frank's wheelchair to physical therapy in the freezing dawn. How every Christmas I baked dozens of cookies and dropped them off at the senior home. "I always thought she was the caregiver," someone wrote. "Turns out she was the family." Nora showed me screenshots of the post. I peeled an apple while she read them aloud. I didn't say much. Just kept peeling. That's when Harold finally called again. "Linda, have you seen what people are saying online? They think you're the victim now." I said nothing. He paused, then added, "Maybe you could come back. Just to visit." Margaret's still in the hospital. I sighed. Harold, I can't lie to you. I have no desire to be in contact with any of you ever again. On the other end of the line I heard him exhale, long, slow, heavy. It wasn't the breath of a man angry he'd lost control. It was the sound of a man realizing he'd lost something irreplaceable. Not just a wife, but the woman who once shouldered the house, the family, the mess. Silently. Constantly. Invisibly. Now the roles were reversed, and the performance had collapsed. They were finally learning what it meant when she was gone. Just days after Margaret was discharged, Frank took a bad fall. Janine stayed up all night, too afraid to sleep, watching over the old man's ventilator. Dennis called Harold twice. The first time from the hospital, the second from their front yard. The second call lasted nearly 2 hours, and somewhere in the chaos, Dennis shouted, "Why did you even marry her in the first place?" The whole house had turned into a war zone. Margaret, disgruntled and defiant, muttered, "I was forced into that hospital. I'd rather die in my own bed." Frank, after the fall, started wandering the halls in the middle of the night, sleepwalking. The stress brought back Janine's sleep disorder. Dennis started taking time off work. Even asked for a department transfer. He was promptly denied. He came home, slammed the door and shouted, "I don't have time for any of this." As the neighbors filled me in on the unfolding chaos, I felt nothing. Because none of it concerned me anymore. I was focused on something far more important. The day I filed my lawsuit, the sun was bright and steady. I wore a navy blue pantsuit Nora had found buried in one of her storage boxes. "With your build, structure matters. Sharp lines. Presence," she said, buttoning my cuff like she was preparing me for a podium, not a courtroom. I arrived 15 minutes early. My attorney was already waiting. She was in her 60s, hair sleeked back, glasses precise, voice cool and firm from the first word. "Linda, you've done the hard part. Now let me take it from here." I nodded and tightened my grip on the folder in my hand. Inside were bank statements, transaction slips, withdrawal logs, all with Harold's signature. The charges were clear. Unauthorized use of joint marital assets, violation of financial agreements, and attempted concealment of funds. Harold arrived later than expected. He wore his familiar checkered blazer, but he looked paler, smaller. Dennis wasn't with him. No one was. He looked at me once on the way in like he wanted to nod to say something, but nothing came out. During the hearing, his attorney tried to argue the withdrawals were for urgent family needs, and that I had never explicitly objected. Diana, my lawyer, stood and calmly asked, "If I took money from your wallet to buy you a gift and we were married, would that count as shared romance or theft?" Harold stared down at the table. When it was my turn, I didn't rant. I simply laid out the caregiving receipts, the bank logs, the co-ownership agreement for the house. "I'm not asking for compensation. I'm asking for respect. No one, married or not, has the right to use someone else's name to buy themselves out of responsibility." As the session ended, I saw the judge scribbling a long note across the bottom of her pad. Harold looked like he wanted to say something as I passed. His lips moved, but no sound came. That afternoon we were granted a temporary asset protection order. Diana told me, "This is leverage. It'll be the cornerstone of any future negotiation." That night back at Nora's, she poured us each a glass of wine. "You did good, Linda." I took a sip and smiled. "Thank you." Harold moved out of the house shortly after. Not voluntarily, court-ordered, part of the temporary living arrangement. He rented a small apartment by himself. Word was the fridge didn't seal right and the stove was an old gas burner that sputtered when lit. Dennis didn't help him pack. Janine wouldn't even return his texts. Melissa was the only one still willing to speak to him, and even she kept it strictly business. "Can we talk about anything that doesn't involve a court document?" she'd say. He now cooked his own meals, did his own laundry, managed his medication schedule, and fielded frantic emails from his temporary legal team. No one explained how compound interest worked on his frozen credit line. No one signed for the new court notices piling up at his door. Even the barber shop that used to cut his hair started avoiding him, because, as they told him flatly, "We know Linda." He became the ex-husband. The man most people quietly agreed had ruined it all. Margaret's health declined rapidly after her second hospitalization. She refused a feeding tube and signed a comfort care directive. "Don't take me back to the hospital," she told the nurse. I don't want to die under those lights. Dennis panicked. He called me. She wants to see you. I asked, does she know who I am? There was a long pause on the other end. She says your name every day. So I went. She recognized me the moment I walked in. I sat beside her bed. Her hand was cold and trembling when it reached for mine. I was too hard on you, she whispered, her lips barely moving. I held her hand. I didn't say I forgave her. I didn't say I hated her either. I just said softly, it's over now. She closed her eyes and let out a long breath, like she'd been holding it for years. 3 days later she passed away. Dennis never called me. My name wasn't in the obituary. Neither was Melissa's. It simply read, loved deeply by her devoted son and daughter-in-law. Harold's response came in the form of a letter, handwritten. 1 sheet of paper. 2 sentences. I know I ruined it. I don't expect you to come back, I just hope you're okay now. That night I sat in Nora's backyard, watching the neighbor's cat leap over the fence like it had somewhere important to be. I tore the letter into small pieces and fed them one by one into the fire pit. The flames flickered onto my face and before I knew it I was smiling. They were gone. And I was still here, center stage, lights on. The day I moved into the independent living community I rolled my suitcase through the front lobby alone. The doorman was an older gentleman with white hair and a gentle smile. He looked up and said, welcome back. I blinked. Back. He pointed toward a wooden plaque hanging above the entrance. Read, freedom begins at the door. I laughed. The apartment wasn't big, a 1-bedroom with a small balcony. But the kitchen was bright and clean, the light poured in soft and warm. I lined up a row of spice jars on the counter. Planted rosemary and cherry tomatoes in the balcony boxes. Set Nora's old ceramic teapot on the windowsill where the sun could find it. Nothing was brand new. But every single thing was mine. I spent the entire day organizing my closet, hanging pictures, vacuuming every corner. I arranged my books by color. Chose a bright yellow shower curtain, the kind I used to think I wasn't allowed to buy. After I carried in the last moving box, I stood in the middle of the living room, took it all in, and felt like something inside me finally loosened, like an old knot had quietly come undone. The neighbors were friendly. One of them, a man named Doug, knocked on my door that evening asking to borrow a lighter. Then, almost shyly, he added, you should come to Friday movie night. They're playing Sunset Boulevard. The cake's free though, can't beat that. I said yes with a smile. That night, I sat on my balcony watching the sky dim into evening. Melissa sent me a text. Mom, is this the life you wanted? I didn't reply right away. I set the phone down, boiled water, made a cup of tea and just sat. The scent of chamomile and mint slowly filled the room. Then I picked up my phone and typed a single sentence. Yes. This life finally has my name on it. The next morning, Nora showed up with a canvas tote bag stamped with the logo of a local radio station. Linda, she said, stepping onto my balcony, are you free this afternoon? The Senior Rights Podcast folks want to know if you'd be willing to share your story. I was about to say no. But then she added, you don't have to give a speech. Just sit there. Tell them how you got from the kitchen to here. I paused. Then laughed. From the kitchen to the balcony? That's not such a long walk. That afternoon I sat across from a woman in her 30s named Jamie, the podcast host. Her voice was gentle but steady. Professional with warmth. Her first question was, who do you think should take care of aging women? I didn't answer right away. I thought about kitchens and medications and midnight air runs and overdraft notices and torn letters and unpaid hours and all the things no one ever asked about. Then I said, our generation of women has spent a lifetime taking care of everyone else. The real question is, who ever asked if we were okay? When the episode aired, messages flooded in. Someone wrote, I called my mother for the first time in 10 years after hearing you speak. Another said, you're not alone. A 70-year-old woman messaged privately to say she just walked away from a 30-year marriage defined by silence. I read every comment, then turned off the tablet. That night I went for a walk around the park before dinner. Doug was in his usual spot holding a coffee. He raised the cup toward me with a grin. So I heard you're a podcast star now? I sat beside him and chuckled. You'll have to wait in line if you want to buy me coffee. On the way home, I caught the last streak of sunset dragging across the sky. It hit me then, Not like thunder but something small and firm like the sound of a drawer finally clicking shut. I don't need anyone to take care of me anymore. Because I'm already doing it. And I'm doing it better than they ever imagined I could. I am Melissa. I used to think my mom was like background music. Always there, never loud, never demanding. Just present. Soft, steady. A part of the room. Growing up, we didn't have much money. My parents didn't earn big salaries, but somehow, every Christmas, there was always a gift waiting for me. And never the same one twice. I believed it was Santa's magic. Until one college break I came home early and found a chipped piggy bank hidden behind the kitchen cabinet. Inside were nickels, crumpled $1 bills, and a folded sheet of paper where she'd kept meticulous records. That's when it hit me. Mom wasn't naturally gentle. She chose to be in all the places she should have put herself first but didn't. For me, I'll never forget my junior year in high school. We had a spring field trip but the fee went up last minute. I brushed it off, told her I didn't want to go anyway. Said it was a waste of time. She just looked at me, said nothing. The next day she showed up at school and handed me a receipt for the trip. Mom, didn't you say the insurance bill came out higher last month? She gave a soft smile. It's fine. Don't worry about it. I've remembered that smile for years. Not because it was big, but because I knew how much it cost. Then there was the winter Grandpa Frank fell. Dad was out of town. Dennis said he was working late. Janine didn't even pick up the phone. Mom took half a day off work from the bank and pushed Grandpa's wheelchair across icy sidewalks, through 3 different hospitals, waiting in lines with frozen fingers. When they finally got home she was so cold she nearly dropped the keys trying to unlock the door. I cried in my room that night. I couldn't understand how the world had put so much weight on one woman, and how she never complained. But she wasn't emotionless. I remember one day clearly. She was alone in the kitchen cooking. Grandma sat in the living room watching TV and yelling, "This fish isn't cooked right. I used to do it better myself." Mom froze. Knife in hand. She didn't answer. Just kept chopping. I walked over to help her and she whispered, "It's not that I didn't do enough. She just never wanted to believe I was tired too." That's when something cracked inside me. 5th grade, my teacher called home. I'd gotten into an argument with another student. Mom took a half day, came to school and sat in the office for 20 minutes straight without interrupting. Then she stood up and said calmly but firmly, "My daughter doesn't pick fights. If she talked back, someone probably deserved it." The teacher didn't have much to say after that. On the way home I apologized. She just squeezed my hand and said, "You know what's right. I know it better than they do." It was the first time I realized, Mom wasn't passive. She just hid her strength inside, a gentleness so quiet most people missed it. In college, the morning of my exchange program interview, I was so nervous I couldn't eat. She made my favorite omelet, rode the subway with me and waited outside the building for 2 hours. She had a fever that day. Her face was pale. "Why didn't you tell me you were sick?" I asked when I found her nodding off near the doorway. "If I told you you'd worry," she said simply. "I got that exchange spot. But it took me years to learn she sold her limited edition stamp collection to pay for the plane ticket. It wasn't worth much," she shrugged. "I just always knew you needed to see the world." When I started my first internship I called her in tears more than once. My supervisor barely looked at me and I started wondering if I was just not good enough. She never asked what I'd done wrong. He just said, "You don't need to please everyone. You only need to not betray yourself." Now that I'm older I realize, every one of those quiet lines was a truth she bled to earn. We all got so used to her not saying anything. So used to her catching the burden at the front door and swallowing the bitterness at the kitchen counter. Even when she left that house I thought she'd come back. But she didn't. There were no arguments. No dramatic exits. No breakdowns. She just packed her things, her own things, and walked out. Like she was gently closing one book and for the first time writing the title on the cover herself. She wasn't missing. She was finally home, in her own life.